The sky over Japan was a pale, cold blue that morning, the kind of blue that looked peaceful from the ground but turned lethal at 30,000 feet. It was March 1945, and the war in the Pacific had become a grinding machine of fire and metal. The B-29 Superfortress bombers, those massive silver birds with their four R-3350 engines roaring like thunder, had become the instruments of America's wrath against the Japanese homeland. Captain James "Jim" Copeland sat in the left seat of Windy City, a B-29 out of the 73rd Bombardment Wing stationed on Isley Field, Saipan. His hands rested lightly on the yoke, feeling the subtle vibrations that came through the controls at altitude. The aircraft shuddered slightly as it climbed through 28,000 feet, the air growing thinner with every 1,000 feet gained. "Oxygen check," he called over the intercom. One by one, the crew responded. 10 men. 10 voices. Navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, radar operator, and the gunners, tail, top, side, and central fire control. Each one breathing through rubber masks connected to bottles of compressed oxygen, because up here, without it, you had maybe 15 seconds of useful consciousness before the world went gray and then black. "All good, Skipper," came the voice of Lieutenant Bob Fernandez, the bombardier, his Boston accent thick even through the crackling intercom. The formation was tight. 27 B-29s stacked in a combat box, each one carrying 10 tons of incendiary bombs destined for the industrial heart of Nagoya. Intelligence had promised light resistance. The Japanese fighter force was supposedly depleted, its pilots green, its fuel reserves dwindling. But intelligence had been wrong before. Jim glanced out the cockpit window. To his right, Lucky Lady held formation, her polished aluminum skin gleaming in the high-altitude sun. To his left, Tokyo Rose kept pace, engines synchronized, wingtips barely 50 feet apart. It was a beautiful, terrible ballet. Machines of war moving with precision through air so thin you could see the curvature of the earth. "Engineer, fuel status?" Jim asked. Staff Sergeant Mike Kowalski, wedged into his station behind the cockpit, ran his eyes over the gauges. "Mains at 3/4, Skipper. Auxiliaries full. We're golden." Golden. The word hung in Jim's mind. Nothing about this mission felt golden. They'd been briefed at 0400 hours in a Quonset hut that smelled of coffee and sweat. The intelligence officer had been too confident, too casual. "In and out, gentlemen. Minimal flak. Negligible fighter activity." But Jim had flown 17 missions. He'd seen B-29 spiral down trailing smoke and flame. He'd heard men screaming over the radio as their aircraft disintegrated around them. He'd watched parachutes blossom against the sky, tiny white flowers that meant someone might survive, might become a prisoner, might be tortured or executed depending on which way the wind blew them. "IP in 12 minutes, Fernandez called out. The initial point, where they'd turn onto the bomb run. Jim nodded, though Fernandez couldn't see him. His co-pilot, First Lieutenant Tommy Chen, a Chinese-American kid from San Francisco with hands as steady as a surgeon's, checked the engine instruments for the 100th time. "Temps are climbing on number 3, Tommy said quietly. Jim looked. Number 3, the inboard engine on the right wing, was running hot. Not critical yet, but trending wrong. Keep an eye on it." "Roger that." Below them, through broken clouds, Japan appeared as patches of green and brown, laced with rivers that caught the morning light. Cities were gray smudges on the landscape. From this height, it was almost beautiful. Almost. If you didn't think about what was down there. If you didn't think about the people who would burn when those incendiaries fell. But that wasn't Jim's job. His job was to get his crew there and back. That was it. The politics, the morality, the grand strategy, that was for generals and presidents. His world was gauges and controls, oxygen and fuel, keeping 11 tons of aluminum and steel flying straight and level through hostile sky. Fighters, 12 o'clock high. The call came from Sergeant Danny West in the top turret, his voice sharp with adrenaline. Jim's eyes snapped forward. At first, nothing. Then, dots. Tiny black dots against the blue, growing larger. His stomach tightened. How many? Count 6, no 8. Jesus, 12 contacts. The formation tightened instinctively. The B-29s drew closer together, their .50 caliber machine guns tracking outward like the spines of metal porcupines. The gunners would have their fingers on the triggers now, hearts pounding, breath coming fast through their oxygen masks. The Japanese fighters came on fast. Nakajima Ki 84 Frank fighters, one of the few types that could reach B-29 altitude. They were painted dark green, almost invisible against the earth below until they climbed into attack position. Their radial engines screamed as they dove. "Steady," Jim said, his voice calm over the intercom. "Gunners, watch your targets. Don't waste ammunition." The first fighter streaked past Tokyo Rose, close enough that Jim could see the red meatball on its fuselage. Tracers laced the air, bright streams of light connecting bomber to fighter. The sky became a lattice of fire. Windy City shuddered as her guns opened up. The twin .50 calories in the tail spoke first, then the top turret, then the side guns. The noise was deafening even through Jim's leather helmet. Spent brass casings clattered inside the aircraft like deadly rain. A Frank rolled inverted and dove at them head-on. Jim saw the winking lights along its wings, 20 mm cannon fire. The Japanese pilot was good, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "Brace!" Tommy shouted. The world exploded. Cannon shells ripped through Windy City's nose, punching holes the size of fists through aluminum skin. The plexiglass bombardier station shattered. Wind screamed through the cockpit at 200 miles per hour, a freezing gale that sucked charts and pencils and anything not tied down into the slipstream. Fernandez's voice came through the intercom, strangled and gasping. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" The Frank flashed past, so close Jim could see the pilot's face, young, determined, already pulling up for another pass. "Tommy, take the controls." Jim was already out of his seat, fighting against the wind, crawling through the navigator's compartment toward the nose. The temperature was 40 below zero. The wind was a physical force trying to push him back. His oxygen mask felt tight against his face, the lifeline that kept him conscious. He reached Fernandez. Blood everywhere. The bombardier was slumped against his equipment, his flight suit dark and wet. A cannon shell had torn through his left side, and another had shattered his oxygen regulator. No oxygen meant death at 30,000 feet. Jim grabbed the portable oxygen bottle, the walk-around bottle meant for emergencies, and pressed the mask to Fernandez's face. The bombardier's eyes were unfocused, lips turning blue. "Stay with me, Bob. Stay with me." But even as he held the mask, Jim could see the gauge on the portable bottle. It was reading low. Very low. Behind him, the battle raged on. And they were still 500 miles from home. The fight lasted 4 minutes that felt like hours. Japanese fighters swarmed the formation like angry hornets, attacking from every angle. High, low, head-on, from the rear. The sky became a chaos of metal and fire. Jim watched from the shattered nose as Lucky Lady took a direct hit to her No. 2 engine. Flames erupted from the cowling, streaming back along the wing. The B-29 held formation for 30 seconds, then began a slow, sickening descent. No parachutes. The fire had probably already reached the bomb bay. 10 men gone, just like that. "Skipper, we've got problems." Kowalski's voice cracked through the intercom. "No. 3 engine just seized. Oil pressure 0. Jim felt the aircraft shudder as the engine died. The propeller, unable to feather properly due to damage, began windmilling, creating drag that pulled Windy City to the right. Tommy was fighting the controls, using rudder and aileron to keep them level. "Shut it down completely," Jim ordered, still cradling Fernandez's head. "Feather what you can." The portable oxygen bottle in his hand was nearly empty. He could feel it getting lighter. Fernandez's breathing was shallow, rapid. His eyes were open but glassy, staring at something that wasn't there. "Bob, can you hear me?" A weak nod. "You're gonna make it. You hear me? You're gonna make it." But Jim knew the math. They were at 29,000 feet. The main oxygen system was damaged. He could hear the hissing of escaping gas somewhere in the fuselage. They had maybe 20 minutes of oxygen left at this altitude, and that was being generous. "IP in 2 minutes," the navigator, Lieutenant Sam Keller, called out. His voice was steady despite everything. "Bomb run heading 270. 2 choices: abort and jettison the bombs over open ocean, or press on and complete the mission." Jim crawled back to the cockpit. The wind through the shattered nose made communication almost impossible. He tapped Tommy on the shoulder and pointed down. Tommy understood immediately. They needed to descend. But descending meant leaving formation. Leaving formation meant becoming an easy target for fighters. And they hadn't dropped their bombs yet. Jim slid back into the left seat and took the controls. The yoke felt heavy, mushy. The hydraulic system was probably damaged too. He glanced at the engine instruments. Number 3 was dead. Number 2 was running rough, cylinder head temperature climbing into the red. Number 1 and 4 were holding steady, but for how long? "All crew, this is Copeland. We're staying in formation until bombs away. After that, we descend to 15,000 feet and make for home. Gunners, keep your eyes open. They'll be coming back." He switched to the command frequency. "Red Leader, this is Windy City. We've taken heavy damage. 1 engine out, oxygen system compromised, multiple casualties. We'll complete bomb run and then break formation for emergency descent." "Static, then. Roger, Windy City." "Understood. Good luck. Good luck." The words felt hollow. The formation turned onto the bomb run. Below them, Nagoya spread out like a model on a table. Factories, refineries, residential districts packed tight with wooden buildings. The bombardiers across the formation synchronized their Norden bomb sights, making tiny adjustments for wind and altitude. Sam Keller had taken over Fernandez's station, lying prone in the shattered nose with wind screaming around him. His hands worked the bomb sight with practiced efficiency. The target was an aircraft manufacturing complex on the city's eastern edge. "Bomb bay doors open," Jim called. The aircraft shuddered as the huge doors beneath the fuselage swung wide, creating massive drag. Tommy added power to compensate, nursing the struggling engines. Japanese flak opened up, black puffs of smoke that blossomed in the sky around them. The anti-aircraft gunners had their range now. Each burst was a gamble, a roll of deadly dice. If one of those shells detonated close enough, it could tear a wing off or detonate the bombs still in the bay. Wham! The aircraft jolted as shrapnel ripped through the fuselage. An alarm bell began ringing. Fire in the aft compartment. Fire in the waist. Sergeant Eddie Morrison, one of the gunners, shouted. "We're on it." Jim kept the wings level, hands locked on the yoke. 5 seconds to release. 4, 3, bombs away. Keller called. The B-29 lurched upward as 10 tons of incendiaries fell free. Jim felt the immediate lightness, the aircraft suddenly eager to climb. But they weren't climbing. They were diving. "Breaking formation," he announced. "Descending to 15,000. He pushed the yoke forward and Windy City dropped her nose. The altimeter unwound. 28,000. 27,000. 26,000 feet. The air grew fractionally thicker with each 1,000 feet lost, but not thick enough. Not yet. Tommy pulled off his oxygen mask. "Skipper, the system's dead. We're running on bottles now. Jim looked at the pressure gauges. Main oxygen, 0. Emergency bottles, critically low. How long? Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe less. At 25,000 feet, you needed oxygen. At 20,000, you could survive for a while. At 15,000, you could breathe, barely. But they were descending through 25,000 now, and the bottles were running dry. Kowalski appeared behind them, his face pale. "Skipper, the fire's out, but we've got structural damage aft of the bomb bay. I can see daylight through the fuselage. And we're losing hydraulic fluid. The gauges are dropping." No hydraulics meant no brakes when they landed. It meant manual control of the landing gear. It meant a crash landing was becoming more likely with every minute. "What about Fernandez?" Jim asked. "Doc's with him. He's stable but critical. Needs a hospital soon." The flight engineer on a B-29 pulled double duty as medic. Sergeant Timothy "Doc" Harrison had apparently stopped the bleeding and gotten Fernandez into a heated suit to fight shock. But without oxygen, even that wouldn't matter. The altimeter read 22,000 feet. Jim's head was starting to pound. The early signs of hypoxia, oxygen starvation. His peripheral vision was narrowing, like looking through a tunnel. Tommy was breathing hard, his lips showing a faint blue tinge. "Deploy the emergency oxygen," Jim ordered. Kowalski moved to the emergency panel and pulled the handle. Nothing happened. "It's not working," he said, pulling again. Still nothing. The fighter damage must have severed the lines. They were flying through 20,000 feet on empty lungs and borrowed time. "Everyone listen up," Jim said over the intercom, his voice steady despite the pounding in his skull. "We're out of oxygen. We need to get below 15,000 as fast as possible. Gunners, stay alert. They'll know we're wounded." And they did know. The Franks came back, 3 of them, circling like sharks around a bleeding seal. They'd watched Windy City break formation, watched her descend alone, engines smoking. Easy prey. The first fighter came in from 5 o'clock high. Danny West in the top turret tracked him, waiting, then opened fire. The twin .50 calories hammered, tracers reaching out across the sky. The Frank rolled away, untouched. The second came from below, a belly attack where the B-29 was most vulnerable. Sergeant Morrison in the waist gun position had a clear shot, but his hands were shaking, vision blurring from oxygen deprivation. He fired anyway, a long burst that went wide. The third Frank came head-on. Jim saw him coming through the shattered nose. The Japanese pilot was lined up perfectly, his 20mm cannons already flashing. Jim could feel rather than see the rounds walking up the fuselage, heavy thumps that shook the entire aircraft. One round punched through the cockpit roof, missing Tommy's head by inches. Another shredded the instrument panel, and suddenly half the gauges were dead. A third hit the main electrical bus, and the lights went out. They were flying at 18,000 feet in a crippled bomber with no oxygen, no hydraulics, failing engines, and now no electrical power. Tommy looked at Jim, his face gray. "We're not gonna make it, are we?" Jim's vision was tunneling, his thoughts slowing like syrup. He wanted to say something reassuring, something captain-like, but his mouth wouldn't form the words. The altimeter read 17,000 feet. His hand moved the yoke forward, pushing them into a steeper descent. Faster. They needed to get lower faster. 15,000 feet. Jim sucked in a breath. The air was thin, inadequate, but it was something. His vision began to clear, the tunnel widening. Beside him, Tommy was gasping like a fish, color slowly returning to his face. "We're through it," Jim croaked. "We're through the worst." But even as he said it, number 2 engine began trailing black smoke. And they were still 400 miles from Saipan. Number 2 engine was dying. Jim could hear it from the cockpit, a grinding metallic scream that meant internal components were coming apart. The cylinder head temperature gauge was pegged in the red. Oil pressure was dropping. Tommy had already cut the fuel mixture, trying to prevent a fire, but the engine was running on fumes and friction and sheer mechanical stubbornness. "Shut it down," Jim ordered. "Feather the prop." Tommy reached for the controls, but the hydraulic system was too far gone. The propeller refused to feather, instead continuing to windmill in the slipstream, creating enormous drag. Windy City yawed hard to the right. Jim had to stand on the left rudder pedal just to keep them flying straight. 2 engines dead. 2 engines running. The B-29 could supposedly fly on 2 engines, but that was in theory, with full fuel tanks and no battle damage. They were shot to pieces, leaking fluids from a dozen holes, and barely maintaining altitude at 14,000 feet. "Fuel status," Jim said. Kowalski checked the remaining gauges that still worked. "We're hemorrhaging fuel from the right-wing tanks. I'm transferring what I can to the left side, but we're losing it faster than I can pump. At this rate, maybe 2 hours of flight time. Maybe less. 2 hours." Saipan was 3.5 hours away at cruise speed. But they weren't cruising. They were limping through the sky at 180 knots, engines screaming, frame groaning, every minute a gift they couldn't afford. Jim did the math in his head. The numbers didn't work. They would run out of fuel somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles short of home. "Options?" he asked Tommy. The co-pilot stared at the chart on his lap, a navigation map of the Pacific covered in red circles indicating Japanese-held islands. "We could try for Iwo Jima. The Marines just took it last month. There's a runway." Jim knew about Iwo Jima. Hell, every B-29 crew knew about it. A tiny volcanic island halfway between Japan and the Marianas, barely 5 miles long. Mount Suribachi on the southern tip. 2 rough airstrips carved out of volcanic ash. It had cost 7,000 Marines their lives to take it. Also, crippled bombers would have a place to land. He checked the chart. Iwo was 120 miles southeast. At their current speed and rate of descent, it was possible. Just barely possible. "Plot a course for Iwo," Jim said. "Sam, can you navigate?" "I'll get us there, Skipper," Keller responded from the navigator's station. His voice was steady, professional. "New heading 145. Distance 118 miles. Jim brought Windy City around to the new heading. The aircraft responded sluggishly, like a wounded animal. Through the shattered nose, he could see the Pacific stretching endlessly in every direction. Gray-blue water beneath gray-white clouds. Beautiful and utterly indifferent to their survival. The Japanese fighters had broken off 5 minutes ago, probably low on fuel themselves. But they'd done their job. Windy City was mortally wounded, held together by rivets and prayers and the desperate skill of her crew. "How's Fernandez?" Jim asked Doc Harrison. The medic's voice came back grim. "He's unconscious. Pulse is weak. He needs blood, surgery, antibiotics, none of which I have. If we don't get him to a hospital in the next hour, he's not going to make it." 1 hour. They didn't have an hour. They had maybe 90 minutes of fuel, and that was if the engines held together, if they didn't lose any more hydraulic fluid, if the wing didn't tear off from structural damage. If. "Skipper, number 4's running rough." Kowalski called out. Jim's eyes snapped to the gauges. Number 4, their last good engine on the right side, was showing fluctuating oil pressure. If they lost number 4, they'd be down to a single engine on the left wing. The aircraft would be unflyable, uncontrollable. They'd spiral into the ocean. "Tommy, reduce power on 4. Keep it alive as long as possible." Reducing power. The airspeed dropped to 165 knots. They were descending now, unable to maintain altitude on reduced power. 13,000 feet. 12,500. 12,000. Jettison everything, Jim ordered. Guns, ammunition, equipment, everything that's not bolted down. We need to lighten the load. The crew went to work. The waist gunners pushed their .50 caliber machine guns out through the windows, expensive weapons tumbling into the Pacific. Ammunition cans followed. Tool boxes. Spare parts. The radar set. The liaison radio. Everything. The aircraft lightened fractionally, the descent slowing but not stopping. 11,000 feet. Distance to Iwo? Jim asked. 85 miles, Keller responded. So close. So terribly far. Number 4 engine coughed. The aircraft shuddered. Jim's hand tightened on the yoke. Come on, baby, he whispered. Just a little farther. The engine coughed again, then caught, the cylinders firing unevenly but still producing power. 10,000 feet. Through the broken clouds ahead, Jim saw something that made his heart leap, a dark smudge on the horizon. Iwo Jima. The island looked like a pork chop from altitude, with Mount Suribachi's distinctive cone rising 550 feet above the southern beaches. There. Tommy pointed. I see it. Roger that, Keller confirmed. Distance 62 miles. Current altitude 10,000 feet. Rate of descent 400 feet per minute. More math. Terrible math. At 400 feet per minute descent, they'd hit sea level in 25 minutes. The island was 30 minutes away. They were going to come up short. Jim made a decision. We're diving for it. Tommy, push number 1 and 4 to maximum power. Kowalski, transfer every drop of fuel to those engines. We're trading altitude for speed and range. Skipper, if we dive too steep, the airframe might. Do it. Tommy pushed the throttles forward. The 2 surviving engines roared, temperature gauges climbing dangerously. Jim pushed the yoke forward, pointing the nose down. Windy City accelerated, diving toward the ocean at 220 knots. The airframe groaned. Rivets popped. Somewhere in the fuselage, metal shrieked against metal. But they were covering ground, or rather, covering water, faster. 8,000 feet. 7,000. 6,000. The island grew larger. Jim could see details now, the black volcanic sand beaches, the scraggly vegetation, the scars of battle. And most importantly, the runway, a pale strip of crushed coral cutting across the island's center. 5,000 feet. Number 4 engine seized. The propeller locked solid, the engine emitting a final grinding scream before going silent. The aircraft yawed hard right. Jim stood on the rudder pedal, using every ounce of strength to keep them flying straight. We're down to 1 engine. Tommy shouted. 1 engine. Number 1, the outboard engine on the left wing, was all that stood between them and the ocean. 4,000 feet. Jim leveled off, sacrificing their dive speed to conserve what little altitude remained. They were 40 miles from Iwo Jima, descending at 600 feet per minute on a single engine. The math was brutal. They had 6 minutes of altitude remaining. The island was 13 minutes away. We're not going to make it, Tommy said quietly. Jim didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the island ahead, calculating, hoping, praying to whatever god might be listening. 3,000 feet. Prepare for ditching, he said over the intercom. Life rafts ready. Emergency positions. The crew moved with practiced efficiency born of countless drills. Doc Harrison secured Fernandez as best he could. The gunners grabbed the emergency life raft packs. Everyone tightened their seat belts, preparing for the impact with water. 2,000 feet. The ocean was so close now that Jim could see individual wave crests. The water temperature would be maybe 65 degrees. They'd survive the ditching, maybe. But hypothermia would set in within an hour. And there were sharks in these waters. Tiger sharks. They'd picked up shot-down pilots before, found nothing but shredded life vests. 1,500 feet. The island was still 25 miles away. A dark shape against the horizon. Close enough to see. Too far to reach. Jim felt a strange calm settle over him. He'd done everything possible. Flown the aircraft to its absolute limits. Made every right decision. Sometimes that wasn't enough. 1,000 feet. "It's been an honor, Skipper," Tommy said. "Likewise." 500 feet. Jim prepared to set the aircraft down on the water, to do a textbook ditching that might give them a chance, however slim. Then the engine note changed. Number 1, which had been running at maximum power for 30 minutes, screaming at temperatures that should have destroyed it, suddenly smoothed out. The cylinder head temperature dropped. The oil pressure stabilized. It was like the engine had found a second wind, some reserve of mechanical will that shouldn't exist. The rate of descent slowed. 400 feet per minute. 300. 250 feet above the water, the descent stopped. They were flying level. "What the hell?" Kowalski breathed. Jim didn't question it. He pointed the nose at Iwo Jima and held the heading. One engine. 300 feet above the Pacific. 20 miles to go. The minutes crawled by. 15 miles. 10. 5. The volcanic cliffs of Iwo Jima rose ahead of them, black rock and white surf. Jim could see the runway now, rough, pocked with craters from Japanese artillery, but there. Real. Possible. Tower, this is Windy City, emergency landing, single engine, battle damage, wounded aboard. Roger, Windy City, you are cleared for immediate landing. Runway 28. Winds light and variable. Fire equipment standing by. Jim had never heard sweeter words. He brought the crippled B-29 over the southern tip of the island, clearing Mount Suribachi by barely 200 feet. Below, he saw Marines in foxholes looking up, waving. They knew what it meant when a shot-up bomber made it back. The runway stretched ahead. Jim had no flaps, hydraulics were gone. No brakes. Minimal control authority. He'd get one chance at this. "Gear down," he ordered. Tommy reached for the manual gear extension handle and began cranking. The main gear dropped and locked with a reassuring thunk. The nose gear jammed. Nose gear won't extend. A belly landing then. On Coral Runway. At high speed. Brace for impact. Windy City came in fast and nose high. Jim held her off as long as possible, bleeding off speed. The main wheels touched down and the aircraft bounced, settling back onto the runway. Then the nose dropped. Metal shrieked as the forward fuselage hit the coral. Sparks flew. The aircraft slewed sideways, grinding to a halt in a cloud of coral dust and smoke. For a moment, silence. Then Tommy laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "We made it. Jesus Christ, we actually made it." Jim's hands were shaking as he shut down the final engine. Through the shattered cockpit, he could see fire trucks racing toward them, Marines running with stretchers. They'd flown 500 miles on zero oxygen, made it back on a single engine, and landed on a piece of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Windy City would never fly again. But her crew was alive.